and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Morenike. My name is Mame Tando, as Morenike stated. I'm a loan monitoring specialist and I'm based in Calgary, and I've been with the bank for almost 8 years.
So I know, we've talked about this topic several times and I can relate. I've had people ask me the same question, but I just want to focus on your day-to-day interactions with people, Mame, and some questions that are a bit odd that might come your way. And how you react to those questions or how you respond to those questions. And one such question that comes to mind is one around where you live. So have you ever had someone come up to you or ask you or even just in a conversation, inquire about where you live and then kind of how the conversation transpires from there?
Sure. I've had a few of those conversations, and I think the main purpose for that question was to get to know me, but unfortunately, it turned into something else, which I don't think that the person had that intention, but that is how I looked at it. For me, as a Black person, when I'm talking to somebody who is Black or non-Black, when I ask them where they live, whether it's a very nice neighborhood or it's like a regular neighborhood, I would just make comments like, oh, I see, do you like living over there? Those are some of the things that I would say. But unfortunately, on a few occasions, I've had people ask me, where do you live? And I'm telling them the location that I live, they follow up with a question like, oh, really? Like, what kind of job does your husband do? Right? Meaning that maybe I cannot afford to live in that community, or people who look like me should live in maybe poorer communities or communities that are not so desirable. And it's not fun to hear that, because you don't know much about people, you don't know their financial capabilities, and going ahead to ask them like, what kind of job does your husband do, makes you feel like, why is it that I'm not good enough to live in that community, or is this community exclusively for these kinds of people, right? So yeah, I would say that I've had that a few times, but it didn't make me feel very good. But in the heat of the moment, I don't think that that is the right time to try and educate the person. So most of the time, I just change the subject, or maybe I walk away so that I don't say anything that would damage the relationship.
Well said, Mami. And I think of a couple of things you mentioned there, like, am I not good enough just based on where I live, even though where I live is supposed to be a good neighborhood, but all of a sudden you're questioning yourself as to whether or not you are good enough to live there. And, even someone asking you, what kind of job does your husband do? I think, why can't Mami be the breadwinner who actually brings the money in and she can afford to, have her family live in a desirable neighborhood? And, and then secondly, what does he do? So are you then being judged by what he does, the level of, where he's at in his workspace? So I can appreciate how that over time can wear you down. And, I wonder, how do you, on days like that, there's days when you can handle it and you give a response, but on the days when you kind of feel a bit tired and worn down, how do you handle those conversations? How do you pivot to another topic? Do you respond in that moment? I know you kind of have a peaceful approach to the process, and I appreciate that. But on the days when you're truly just kind of done with it, what do you do?
Usually my husband is my sounding board. So I would call him and let him know how I feel about what has happened, because just as I said earlier on, I don't think in the heat of the moment it's very good for me to respond, because I might say something that I might regret later on. So I just let it go for the moment, and I speak to him and express my frustrations or whatever emotion that I'm feeling, and he usually calms me down. And also I call friends of mine who I think that would understand where I'm coming from, because they also go through similar situations or even worse situations. So they kind of help me to like not lose control of my emotions and let it out instead of like keeping it inside. And maybe as time goes on, like look for opportunities to educate whoever it is that I was speaking to who asked me that question in a non-confrontational way, because you could be right, but maybe the approach that you use could make it look like you are in the wrong. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I like your phrase or your plans and your how you support yourself, how you surround yourself with a strong net group, a strong support group, people who can hold you up on those days when you can't stand, and where you have a safe space to have these conversations and truly be heard and know that people understand where you're coming from. So thanks for sharing, Mommy.
Welcome.
I'm gonna go to Jose. To introduce yourself before I send you a lot of questions to respond to. Welcome, Jose.
Thank you, Monique. Yeah, my name is Jose Huesca Burrell. I am with the Enterprise Architecture team. I've been with CWB for about 5 years now, I believe. Yeah, so it's been a great place. We have to say that CWB is a great place to work, very diverse place. And I think we want to thank the organization itself for giving us the opportunity to have this platform to continue to have conversation around race, mental health, diversity, and the like. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. And I just love to hear, when we talk about how long we've been here, yourself 5 years, Mommy 10 years. And, our first, when I look back to when Noble started 2020, yourself and Mommy were one of our first guests or first members to join Noble. And now fast forwarding 2 years into it, I just love to see how much we've grown. I don't know that we've met each other face to face, but we have that rapport where we can reach out to each other and support each other. So thanks for agreeing to be part of the podcast today. The question I have for you, and I know you're very passionate about your career and the work that you do, but have you ever come across, a situation where how do you handle yourself in the workplace as a Black individual who's trying to rise up in the organization and, make their presence known and be successful?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, we have to recognize that mental health is not a Black people issue. I think it's a universal issue. It affects everybody. It affects the Native Canadian. It affects all the other immigrants. But us as Black people, our issues are amplified because of the circumstances of race and the history of race in this society. And so from my perspective, I take it as a universal thing, but we have to recognize that it is real and it affects us differently. For instance, a lot of people, when they immigrate to Canada, they go through a lot of challenges and difficulties. Some people get a one-way visa, other people get a work permit, which is attached to an employer. And so when they get here, the employers normally, some of them would confiscate your passport, and that limits you. In other words, you are now owned by these people. Even though we say that racism no longer exists, but these are practice of almost slavery, and so we have to deal with these sort of things because the idea of your employer can make you or break you is something that is embedded into some employers. They try to practice and show you that you are their property. So this sort of attitude and practices kind of rub off. And some other people that would come into organizations like CWB comes with this type of mentality. it is not expressed the same way. They can't confiscate your passport, but I think they have power over you. They own you. You have to work because they are your manager, and you got to actually do things the way they think you're supposed to do. So as a Black person, I don't normally take it that way. I see myself as a universal citizen, or global citizen, whatever you want to call it. But I don't put myself into a box where I am waiting for somebody to come and rescue me, because someone is actually trying to enforce their way of thinking or their perspective of how I should be over me. People expect you to be Black and act Black. And so I do not put myself into those type of categories. So from my perspective, I think it's very important that we continue to educate ourselves and not victimize ourselves, and be able to stand up for ourselves. We are grateful for CWB to have these sort of forums where we can express these things. But people need to understand that it's real. It's real. It's a global phenomenon, but it affects certain people more than others because of our circumstances. So I want to actually say to those that are listening to us that yes, it is real, but please understand that it affects certain people more because of how the society is structured, some of the things that go beyond what we can see, and sometimes we kind of do things without knowing, because it's common thing that we've been doing, we see our parents doing, we see our previous managers or bosses doing, and so we continue to do them. And because the Black history here in America has its own challenges. In the beginning, people couldn't speak, and as we speak and we continue to speak, our voices is being heard more and more. So we should continue to talk. We should continue to express ourselves, and we're grateful that there are people here in CWB that are listening and are actually making changes.
That's amazing. And that just goes to speak to the power of allyship and just having advocates, in different spaces. I never thought about the barriers that people face who come as international students or workers, and I can't imagine having a passport seized and you feel like you're at the mercy of someone in order to make progress in your career. So thanks for sharing that perspective, Jose. And just to, pause on that thought process and the reality of the importance of having a healthy mental health space to be able to come to work as your full self and be productive. Sometimes we underestimate because we're looked at as like, the strong Black woman who shows up at work, but sometimes she's not strong and she needs help. And just pausing to recognize that and taking a day to recharge or whatever it is that we need is truly important. So thank you, Jose. I look at you as someone that, I look up to you in your career and what you've done with the bank. And I'm sure there are other people that are up and coming that are just starting. And, if you had any kind of piece of advice for someone who's a new graduate just joining the workforce at the corporation, do you have any bits of advice or words of wisdom that you would pass on to them to help them kind of start the journey right or be prepared for the journey ahead?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question that we can answer in many different ways. I think the circumstances we are in, we are within a CWB work setting, but the issue that we're trying to address here is beyond CWB. And so when you look at a young Black employee or young Black graduate, which is the focus of the topic, I think we have to look at it from a bigger context. The issue we're talking about here has to do a lot with dependency, okay? So because you depend on the other people, they have the power to exercise authority and do things over you that actually stress you. So as young Black graduates coming in, I would say that we have to think differently. A lot of people kind of tell us you could do anything you want to do, be anything you want to be. But there is another side to this, okay? Sean Rochester has a book called CPR for the Soul, where he actually talks about a passage of the Bible about, it goes, I'm not a priest, so it goes something around the parable of the seed, something like that. And it says that a farmer goes planting, and then he plants seeds. Some actually found fertile soil, others in rocks, and others in